So our first speaker today is Dr. Matthijs Degraeve, sorry, who's a FWO postdoctoral researcher at Vrije Universiteit Brussels in Belgium. He conducts research in the intersection of urban business and environmental history in the 19th and 20th centuries. In his PhD, he studied the Brussels construction sector and its relationship with a transforming urban society and space from 1830 to 1970. The PhD was awarded the European Business History Association's Best Dissertation Prize in 2019-2021 in 2022, so for the previous year. In his postdoctoral research, Plumbing the City, an environmental perspective is added to the production of urban space. The scope is broadened to include Paris and London, while a focus is placed on a major transformation of urban and domestic water use in the 19th and earliest 20th centuries. In particular, it is studied how the modern indoor water technologies and infrastructures were managed and negotiated on a daily basis by different actors, from regulatory authorities to plumbers and water users. While indoor plumbing came to exemplify an ultimate engineered control over urban flows of water in this period, the inherent fragility, fallibility, and risk involved in the use of modern infrastructures became clear as well, which forms the subject of this presentation. So if you can all join me with the react button to clap and welcome Matthijs, and I'll let him start.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me all right? And can you see the screen with the slides? Yes. Perfect. So, hello everyone. Great to be a part here of the wonderful seminar series. To be part here of this panel on water justice specifically. What I'll do is I'll talk about specifically hybrid type of envirotechnical injustices, whereby victims of defective water infrastructures and technologies such as leaking water pipes and flooding sewers were faced with the challenge of assigning responsibility and obtaining compensation for flood damage in a context of increasing technological and institutional complexity. The context is that of expanding urbanization, industrialization, and the breakthrough of capitalist society in 19th and early 20th century urban Europe, where this so-called technosphere developed that entailed a large-scale infrastructuralization of networked systems for all kinds of flows in the urban metabolism, energy, water, waste, etc. This to try and acquire as much control as possible over natural resources, over the flows of water, but also to spur economic growth, to gain control over daily urban life, etc. However, these aspirations of control also brought new risks. I hope this is working all right. I don't think so. It's not in my case. My apologies. New risks, for example, for flooding. You had natural watercourses that were vaulted, that were confined to small sewers. You had floodplains that were covered with impermeable concrete, water mains bursting under seasonal influences of frost, for example, and sewers that flooded if they were unable to cope with exceptionally heavy rainfall. And historians working on the intersection of technology and environment have identified the hybrid nature of these envirotechnical or techno-natural accidents and disasters as they combined these natural phenomena with human engineered exacerbations of ecological risks. And the inherent risks associated with modernity have since long been recognized by sociologists such as Beck and Giddens, of course, then especially the fragility of modern infrastructures by Peter Sepelsa, and the fact that defects, failures, and accidents form systemic features of this complexity of modern technological systems by Charles Perrow. More recently, this association with modernity has been somewhat exchanged for one with the rise of capitalism, with capitalist urbanization that involved simultaneous productions and mitigations of ecological risks, as recently argued here on the right by Daniel Immerer. Still useful, however, is Giddens' connection between risk and responsibility, a relationship that was greatly complicated by this rise of manufactured risks in the 19th century. An increasing complexity that was not only a purely material or infrastructural matter, but also had an important social and institutional dimension. You had a lot of different actors involved, local and national governments, distribution companies, land developers, homeowners, who all played a role in this exacerbation of flood risks, which deeply obscured, is what I argue, this issue of responsibility, to the extent that responsibility became very hard to attribute, or became at least disputable, debatable, deniable by these different actors. And it's especially when a failure of public infrastructure caused flood damage on private property that this issue of responsibility became very hotly contested, as their different public and private interests collided. That's why I zoom in on what happens on private property, where these flood effects were often most tangibly experienced, to question how these envirotechnical risks were dealt with on a day-to-day basis, both in top-down and in bottom-up dynamics of governance and negotiation, asking who was held accountable, who recognized responsibility for themselves, and or on whom was responsibility imposed. That's basically what I'm studying, or what I studied so far, based on flood reports, also other sources on urban flood management, drafted by local administrations and also some private water companies in London, Paris, and Brussels between 1850 and 1914. All three obviously growing, industrializing capital cities in this period, fairly similar public health needs and challenges. So definitely sharing this common ground, but also having different environmental, different infrastructural conditions, and also different political and institutional arrangements for water management, wastes, flood management, etc., all having an impact on this creation and mitigation of flood risks. So I'll pay attention, obviously, to the particulars of these cities. You'll notice that because of the work that I did so far, the focus will be mostly on Paris. And first, I'll start by discussing what happened with water leaks, leaking water pipes, and then I'll move on to sewer floods. I'll start by taking you to Paris, to the Rue des Tuileries, in the heart of Paris, on a Sunday afternoon, the 23rd of February, 1908, around 4:45 p.m., chaos erupts as a large 1-meter water main suddenly bursts beneath Rue des Tuileries. And immediately the water's immense pressure lifts the ground. A mass of 25,000 cubic meter potable water soars to the street level, engulfs the Jardin des Tuileries, the surrounding streets, sweeps away the pavement, interrupts all traffic. The water can't be sufficiently drained through the small sewers of the street, so it quickly rises above the pavement, rushes into the cellars and into the basements of the buildings that have outside window wells. Then once inside, the water inflicts enormous damage in the houses, in the shops, the restaurants, the hotels, which were in this area owned, frequented, inhabited by Paris's upper class. The greatest damage is inflicted here in the basement of Hotel Regina, one of Paris's most luxurious hotels, where the water rises 2 meters high. And besides accommodating different workshops and service rooms, the basement most notably serves as a storage space for 153 luggage trunks from the hotel's wealthy guests. The costs of the damage are obviously immense. In total, 114 claims for compensation are filed, one by the hotel itself, 57 by its guests, and 56 by other owners and tenants in the area. So, of course, very quickly, this question rises, who should be held accountable for this flood? Although the water supply in Paris was commercially exploited by the Compagnie Générale des Eaux, it was the city itself that was responsible for the maintenance of the physical infrastructure. So all eyes turned to the city authorities for compensation, but they initially claim that there was no apparent cause for an event that could not be foreseen, so the city could not be held responsible. Very soon, it became clear that their liability was in fact undeniable. At the end of March 1908, the prefect of the Département de la Seine informs the Municipal Council of Paris that the city had to carry all the costs, and an initial claim of 802,000 francs was reduced amicably to a sum of 616,000 francs that had to be paid by the city of Paris to these flood victims. Very sudden leaks, big ruptures of public water mains, also fire hydrants, of course, had these very spectacular short-term effects, but much more often water leaks produced so-called quiet crises, also slow disasters, these gradual, almost imperceptible processes that only very slowly increased vulnerabilities. You had water leaks that manifested themselves often only after years of infiltration, when walls, foundations have become damp, have become moist, saturated with water, threatening on the one hand the structural integrity of the building, but through mold, humidity, also the health of the inhabitants. Most of the time, luckily, the damage was purely material, consisting of goods, and very often that was trading stock from shopkeepers, companies that had incurred water damage in a flooded basement. And these owners and these tenants then turned to the actors that they deemed responsible. And in Paris, an example here on the left, the fact that this water supply was commercially exploited by a private company sometimes led to some confusion. At first, these homeowners, Vinot and Cochot, held this company responsible for the infiltration in their basement, which had been going on for 7 years by 1890. And it's only after the company denied any responsibility that they turned to the city, which eventually reimbursed the executed repair works. In Brussels, on the right, the water supply was a public matter, organized by the city itself. And after they received flood complaints, the city services always first tried to verify whether indeed it was the city's water pipes that had caused the accidents. And very often they could prove that the cause was elsewhere, often with a leaky water pipe from the neighbor, so a private water pipe. But even when the city's responsibility was recognized, the main objective was always to avoid expenses, for example, by granting indemnities as a form of relief rather than formal recognition of liability, which could lead to much higher costs in courts. London was a special case. Until 1902, the water was supplied by several private water companies who were also held responsible in case of leaky water pipes, usually also recognized this, but also minimized indemnities by making their own estimates of the damage instead of, as I quote here on the left, instead of those by the victims who, as usual, greatly overstated the injuries sustained. And they also tried to settle as soon as possible, also to avoid legal proceedings. But then when the leak in London occurred within the house, indemnities were often claimed the other way around, to be paid by the water users to the company. This was because of the specific pricing policy of water, which charged in function of the value of the property instead of measured consumption. which was more socially just, but did not really provide an incentive to economize on water use. So these companies needed to have their own waste inspectors to pay house-to-house visits, searching for defective fittings and issuing notices that threatened with fines, with cutting off supply, or even with lawsuits. And here on the right is an example from a court case from the East London Waterworks Company from 1883. And these cases mention how people's fittings were found broken, leaking for 90 to 120 gallons per hour for periods up to a month. So quite serious leaks. And some homeowners came up with an excuse. This is an example, Mr. Long arguing that he couldn't repair the fittings on account of there being sickness in the house. But nevertheless, these homeowners were consistently fined for neglecting to repair their fittings. Then onto sewer floods, where this interplay around the question of responsibility was even more contentious. For floods resulting from the insufficiency or the failure of public sewers, governments in this period were still very reluctant to acknowledge any responsibility. In Brussels, I found some complaints in the archives that attest really to the flood risks that a growing city was increasingly confronted with due to this expansion of impervious surface, the suppression of natural flows, the insufficiency of public sewers. This is an example from 1868, when 7 homeowners on the street here in blue, a low-lying Chaussée d'Etterbeek, they complained about the insufficiency of their streets' sewers, which had to cope with a lot of additional runoff and wastewater from streets in the nearby area that were recently laid out. And so the result was that in case of heavy rainfall, the sewer frequently overflowed into their houses. Shortly before, still, there was a small river, the Maalbeek, flowing alongside the road, draining all the surplus rainwater from the area, but the advancing urban development had compelled the city to fill this riverbed to divert the water into the sewer. Nevertheless, the city authorities were very reluctant here to acknowledge any responsibility, and also in other cases, they consistently invoked the argument of force majeure. There was heavy rainfall causing the sewers to flood. This could not have been foreseen, so no one, especially not the local authorities, could be blamed for the flood. There were very similar scenarios in Paris, where also urban sanitation goals led to the canalization of the river Bièvre, a tributary to the Seine, between 1828 and 1912, with, as a result, the properties bordering on the riverfront or the former riverfront flooding repeatedly, but as was the case in Brussels, denying this insufficient capacity of the sewers was the main strategy for the city of Paris to avoid paying indemnities. This happened all along during the 19th century, but by the early 20th century, the Département de la Seine, so the higher government level, sided with the flood victims. This is a case after a storm in 1901, after which the experts from the Département argued that it was redirecting the river into sewers, into small sewers, had caused the flood, and they forced the city to take responsibility for the damage and to compensate the victims. Then a final example, also beyond urban floodplains, this complexity of water infrastructures could lead to these conflicts between government bodies on who was accountable for flood damage on private property. This is the Dérivation Saint-Ouen in Paris, a sewer running out of the city across the neighboring municipality of Saint-Ouen, where it regularly overflowed at least 5 times between 1898 and 1905, always from the same 2 sewer inlets on Rue de la Chapelle, so affecting the same people's homes, basements, goods every time. This is a complaint letter from 1905 from a wine merchant complaining that he had had to clear more than 20 wheelbarrows of infectious earth and all kinds of matter, right down to dead dogs from his basement. And on the one hand, here you had the municipality of Saint-Ouen and again the Département de la Seine accusing Paris of insufficiently curating their sewers, and they argued that it's the city that should pay for the damage. Whereas, on the other hand, the city of Paris denies all responsibility because Saint-Ouen also used their sewer, so the Paris sewer, to drain their rainwater away, and it's through their sewer inlets that the sewer system had overflowed. Showing, I think, really how the Parisian metropolis really lays this spatial claim on its surrounding area, which it needed to dispose of its own waste, but where the city's infrastructure could only be used at their own risk. Illustrating, I think, as argued by Vale and Campanella here, how flood control works, such as sewers, often provided disproportionate assistance to certain people and certain places while they passed on the problem downstream, where due to this complexity and this ambiguity surrounding the issue of responsibility, it's the flood victims that were left waiting for compensation. This is letter from 1905, September 1905, or a report from a homeowner and his two tenants whose basements on Rue de la Chapelle had flooded in May 1903, but they still hadn't received any compensation for the damage valued at 115, at 19, and at 14 francs, respectively. To briefly conclude, I think adding this long-term envirotechnical perspective on rain, sewage, and drinking water to Giddens' earlier approach to risk and responsibility shows how in the 19th and early 20th centuries, this urban growth and this infrastructuralization of water really produced an increasingly complex social and material situation containing both natural and technological factors, public authorities and private companies, homeowners and tenants, in which not only the flood risks themselves were exacerbated, but in the process also the complex interplay of causes for the creation of these flood risks became very much obscured, allowing these different actors involved to shift the blame, to shift the responsibility to each other. As also observed by Taylor and Trentman, water users, or in my case, flood victims, were very vocal in holding others accountable, in demanding to be compensated, but they weren't always successful, especially when their interests were not aligned with those of the government. We see across London, Paris, Brussels, that avoiding or minimizing responsibilities was one of the main goals of urban governments, of private water companies, with as main result that flood victims were left in the cold for many years, waiting to be compensated, waiting for this question of responsibility to be resolved. And with this, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the other presentation and to the discussion afterwards.
Thank you so much, Matthijs. That was amazing. Really interesting. We're gonna move to the next speaker, MD Rahamatullah. I'll let you start sharing your bio as start sharing your slides as I read out your bio. Sorry. So MD Rahamatullah is currently pursuing a PhD in the Department of Sociology of South Asian University, New Delhi. He has previously completed both his MPhil and master's degree at the same university, and he did his undergraduate at the Department of Sociology in Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman Science and Technology University, Bangladesh. Additionally, he holds a postgraduate diploma in human rights, international humanitarian law, and refugee law from the Indian Society of Law in New Delhi. He has been working on the Life and Livelihood Association with water and climate change in the Sundarbans area of Bangladesh. His PhD project would focus on drinking water governance, the politics of commoditization of drinking water, the stakeholders involved in the supply chain, and the gender nature of the problem in accessing safe drinking water. His PhD project will open up newer ways to understand the meaning of water and water governance in the wake of climate change. His broad research interests include water governance, human-water interface, anthropology of water, anthropology of environment, gender study, and South Asia. And if you'll join me in using the applause emoticon reaction to welcome him.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be part of this discussion today. So today I will talk about Pani and politics of safe drinking water and ethnography of water infrastructure in Sundarbans. This is actually my part of my PhD dissertation. So the Sundarban is the world's largest mangrove forest, located in deltic region of the Ganga, Brahmaputra, and Meghna River, spanning the southern part of Bangladesh and eastern India. Known for its rich biodiversity, it's a home to the iconic Royal Bengal tiger, saltwater crocodile, and variety of fish, birds, and plant species. The regions play a crucial ecological role by acting as a buffer against coastal erosion and cyclone. In addition to its environmental significance, the Sundarbans support the livelihood of millions, but increasingly vulnerable to the climate change, rising salinity, and water insecurity. So this work actually aimed to explore the politics of shifting notion of free sources of water to commodified water. So this work is based on so this is the multiple sources of water in my place, means like in my field site. So like this work is based on an ethnographic fieldwork associate with the water filtration infrastructure, particularly ponds and filter and water treatment plants. Later, I will discuss what is this. So, I conducted my fieldwork at Sakbora village, Gabura Union in Satkira districts. As we all know about that, Satkira district is one of the most climate vulnerable district in Bangladesh. Uh, so in this work, means like I relied upon relied upon Foucauldian notion of governmentality as a conceptual framework. Inspired by Foucault, I defined governmentality in context of my thesis as the set of practice, strategy, and mechanism through which power and control are exercised over access, management, and distribution of resource, particularly water, in Sundarban, which is not limited to the direct state intervention but involve a networks of actors. For instance, government institutions such as Department of Public Health Engineering, Water Development Board, local union porishad, international and national NGOs, international donor agencies, and aid providers that regulate, govern, and manage the provision of safe drinking water by shaping behavior, perception, and norms around its distribution and uses of water. In this context, water governance is not just a response to a scarcity of safe drinking water or ecologically challenged, but a political process that tells us the politics of safe drinking water as, in my place, in Sundarban area. So for today's discussion, I divided this section as a three main section. First section is that like pond as a safe sources to contaminated water. As you all see that this is the pond. Pond is a stagnant water sources of water. In my place, basically pond are dig by man. So there are two types of ponds, a natural pond and man-made pond. In my place, all are man-made ponds actually. So like in Sundarban area, like as you can see that like most of the people, most like ponds are one of the main sources of water. Uh, but historically, even like historically this pond used one of the main sources of water for this place, because this place geographically like arsenic contaminated and salinity contaminated. So now, at a present times, salinity intrusion due to the shrimp cultivation and the geological causes of arsenic are responsible for the contamination of pond water. So this contamination I demonstrate has as a transformed pond as a site of relational placemaking. Due to increasing contamination of pond water, there is slowly a loss of association and belonging to particular place. People not only visited another person's house to fish water, but also that fishing water become sources of other social ties, which contaminated pond water. These social ties are fragile effort. For instance, in my fieldwork, I found that in summer season, due to the receding water level, people have started changing uh, money for charging money for per pitcher, and argue that many people come to my pond over the years to collect water. I have fish in my pond and I use this water for my family, use it to my vegetable garden. Among the villagers, there are always a try to protect and keep cleaning the pond water so that its water remain clean. Unfortunately, shrimp cultivation and salinity hit into the pond, uh, because like see now develop government and NGO, so they are promoting shrimp cultivation in my place, means in my study area. And the shrimp, as we all know that like shrimp, for shrimp that ideal water is saline water. So the moment you will cultivate this shrimp in saline water, then these water sources of water also become contaminated, and also that land will also be contaminated, or will be contaminated with salinity. So that pond or fresh sources of water also will become salinity. So this is another threat, uh, along with the arsenic. So for this reason, uh, uh, government agency and non-government agency, they introduce a ponds and filter. This is the ponds and filter. Can you see, like this is the ponds and filter, uh, so through which people like relying upon water. So this is one of the uh, familiar technology where or sources of water infrastructure where coastal people drink water. So, and to ensure the safe drinking water since 1984, the Department of Public Health Engineering, along with the international organization UNICEF, has introduced ponds and filter. During 90s, in contrast to the arsenic contamination water and salinity water, ponds and filter was implemented as an alternative way for safe drinking water in southern west coastal region of Bangladesh. Ponsan filter is a low technological water filtration technology which is part of the broader infrastructure fixed in this ecological sensitive region, connected to the existing system like dam, embankment in that place. So it's usually constructed with bricks, cement, and so on. It has multiple layer of chamber. Each chamber comprise different layer of stone, activate carbon, coals, and sand. Each chamber is differentiated with a filtration net. Water is lifted from pond with the help of hand pump tube well. You can see that woman is like lifting water from this tube well. When women come to collect the water, they pass the hand pump to fill the filtration, and they place the container to collect the water from the tap attached to the filtration chamber made of concrete. So you can see this is the picture and tap. So water is coming from there. This water is available at no cost. So this Ponson filter is installed in the pond of the local elite, and because like all pond are not suitable for uh, installing PSF. For installing PSF, some like what a pond should have some characteristics. Suppose it should be big pond and have good uh, good water quality also, and only elite people have this sort of quality of pond, because this pond also related to the ownership of land. Poor peoples have no land or like sufficient land to have a good pond in my place. So but then like only and this local elite have good connection with this NGO, and they have also like they because of this good connection, or they NGO people give them or install constant filter in local elite people, if some like poor peoples have good pond also. So and you can see that like this ponds and filter, like see like how what sort of how much the intensity of water water crisis. See, like this was a picture. So this is the ponds and filter, and people are mostly women are here waiting for collecting this water. And so you can see this like this ponds and filter installed in between the three villages, and mostly like see people comes to collect water around 10 around average 2 kilometers away, and they need they had to wait around 30 minutes or sometimes 1 hours to collect the water in this PSF site. So like this is one thing. And also like you can see that what I found is that like ponds and filter uh this NGO and particularly NGO, they are taking over this ponds and filter installation role, and they only this ponds and filter is not a ponds and filter or water infrastructure. This is one of the infrastructure through which a state or mostly NGO they govern peoples, or like they regulate peoples. How they regulate peoples or like control over the peoples, like only this NGO determine from where we will set up this ponds and filter, who will come to this ponds and filter to collect water, how many people will come to this ponds and filter, despite ponds and filter considering as a community resource. So this you have to we all have to keep in mind. So like how infrastructure can be a tool of exercise that power over the people, or like people. So also like ponds and filter is what I found in my research, despite as a controlling apparatus. So ponds and filter is a like site of resistance for women like who come to collect water in this place, because like when women collect the water, they discuss about some like their own like problem or something related to, suppose like if like a member or chairman. Member and chairman is like a political local elected persons in this place in Bangladesh. So like so how this chairman, member and other elite persons controlling over them, and they discuss like we should not ever like allow them, or this or they make a like concern, like common concern among themselves. They discuss about it also, like some of their family issue also, like, and they there is among them they have a like we feelings type. So among the women who come to collect this water, and they this we feelings or this commonhood make them like as a give an agency for their right also in some case. So this one thing. But see now like water treatment plant also like not working properly, because this water treatment plants are like, due to the proper management, water treatment plants do not work in this place properly or not success, because see this is only mainly concerned as a community resource, or nobody is liable for like uh, taking care or something, means like something for that. So this is the point where NGO is also like even like during the summer season, so this water quality also like become bad. So that time, so this ponds and filter water is not suitable for drinking. For this purpose, now like what NGO and governments collaboratively, they are introducing other water infrastructure. This is called water treatment plants. So this water treatment plants is um, this is the latest water infrastructure for ensuring sources of safe drinking water in my place. And this water treatment plant is a small scale technological water infrastructure which is partly used for desalination process. So in 2012, in the coastal region of Bangladesh, the government and non-government organization introduced the desalination water treatment plant to ensure safe drinking water in defense of scarcity of safe drinking water. In my work, I have found that these people are shifting. So because like from these free sources, as I mentioned earlier, like that ponds and filter water from that ponds and filter or pond, the all this water was free. There was no cost on that. So now people are shifting to the commodified drinking water sources from this water treatment plant. Uh, so, and the people have to pay for this, and per liter they have to pay point 50 Bangladeshi taka. So and people come to collect this water with a jar, and this they carry like 10 to 30 liters of water jar, they take this water. And see, this is here, this is the politics. So like for my case, like, so this is like how water treatment plants work. Suppose like the mostly the sources of water treatment plant is groundwater, then it go to the feed pump, and there is a then it from the feed pump it go to the jumbo filter, and then vessel, then jumbo filter again, and then RO member. And then there is a two like one is fresh water and one is waste water. And this is very dangerous in a sense, like suppose for, so one of my respondent, he informed me like for 1 liter getting fresh water from the RO water treatment plant, you need to you need 12 liter, means like 1 equal to 12. Can you imagine that? Like, so this is also like concern for water level also in for future. So even this is the like this water treatment plants to understand the politics of water treatment plant installation of water treatment plants in Sundarbans, it's crucial to consider the politics of aid and development in third world context. So, like thinker like David Mose, Tanya Morelli, Michelle highlight how international donor agency impose transnational governmentality through developmental discourse. Suppose in Sundarban, water treatment plants were introduced by mostly donor agency, aid agency, and NGO as a response to water scarcity and climate adoption, reflecting a broader attempt to govern local population. However, this same agency also, this is the interesting in a sense, like this same agency also promotes shrimp and crab cultivation as a global flow of capitalism, which contribute to raising salinity, as I earlier mentioned that in water and land. Paradoxically, this worsening the region's water crisis while offering the livelihood support, because like they are promoting this water infrastructure, means like this water treatment plant as a climate change mitigation tool in this place. And also at the same time, this agency or these actors, they are also promoting this shrimp cultivation and the crab cultivation in this place as a livelihood or mitigation tool. So this is a kind of paradoxical situation here. So like then I wonder like how this actor regulates people's life through the technology or water infrastructure. For instance, they also introduce water ATM machine at these water treatment plants uh, as a set of limit. They set the limit. Suppose like one household are allowed only 10 liter of water in on day. So this process of regulation and control over the access to water not only indicate the regulation of resource, but also the way of governing and regulating people's life as a process of governmentality. So like also there is a debate in this place. So in a sense, suppose that uh, uh, you can see in this image there are some like a local on newspaper they newsed on like that Satkira coastal residents really against water commoditization. So despite facing this water in crisis, they don't want as a this water source because they have to pay for it, and in this place these people are means like geographically very climate vulnerable place, and also like this people also mostly dependent on this Sundarban area for Sundarbans for their livelihood. So mostly people are very much economically vulnerable. So this is very difficult to like pay for them for water, and also like even what I found is that like those there is a equal inequalities creating through this new water infrastructure. Suppose like so this is can you imagine that like I suppose like those who can who can afford Kenapani means this commodified water, and who cannot afford this commodified drinking water, there is a two group of people means like they think they like those who only those who cannot afford this water commodified water, they become neglected means like psychologically, or people say, oh, these people, so you are not you don't drink commodified water means like there is also like hierarchy. Like suppose they think about this hierarchy, and also like those who can able to afford kenapani, they feel this is this consumption of kenapani itself like as a matter of prestige, because I can afford commodified water, you cannot, so I am quite superior than you in terms of consumption power and affordability power. So like and this commodified water added extra burden in their daily expense and causing fragile social relationship among them. So considering this, I argue in this given society, the commodity of water in the question of is the question of justice and human rights also. So in the context of Sundarban, water treatment plant under the framework of governmentality as an infrastructural fix through which the transformation of free sources of water to the commoditization of water in the form of introduction of Kenapani, and the question of affordable capacity towards the Kenapani or commodified drinking water raises an ethical question and human rights to the safe drinking water. So thank you.
Thank you so much, MD. This was really fascinating, and I see already so many connections to discuss. We'll move swiftly on to the next speaker to ensure that we've got more time for discussions at the end. So I'll let Mark share his slides as soon as MD stops sharing, and as I read his bio. So Dr. Mark Friars is a lecturer and founder member of the Film and Media Department and School of Creative Industries at the Open University in the UK. His thesis examined the intersection of maritime culture, regional identity, and audiovisual media. He has since published widely on a number of topics related to environmentalism, maritime, and cultural history, including in the Journal of Popular Television, Gothic Nature, Revenant, and edited collections including on the costume drama, global folklore and maritime animation, British naval cinema, and the oceanic blockbuster, Daphne du Maurier and hydrofeminism in children's maritime culture. He is the recipient of several Book Authority Awards and been interviewed by the Washington Post for his expertise on oceanic culture. His forthcoming monographs include The Woman in Black with Liverpool University Press, Cybernetic Imaginations with Peter Lang, and The Haunted Waters of British Film and Television, Dark Mythology by Palgrave Macmillan Gothic Series. So if you'll join me with applause reaction to welcome him and I will let him start. You're muted, Mark, sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry, I just I'm having trouble getting the, oh, okay, got it there. Right, I'll try and be as quick as possible. I was going to suggest if people wanted to ask questions about the first two talks in the chat, then I'm perfectly happy with that if it's good for time. Okay, so the sea has always been integral to the spectacle of cinema. From rough sea at Dover from 1895 to the dramatic use of the sea in some of the biggest films of all time, Jaws and Titanic, to the contemporary blockbuster Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, cinematic evocations of the sea and spectacle have been almost inseparable, most demonstrably in blockbuster narratives. And if this is the case, and these films indicate our cultural signifying practices, then the representation of the sea in Hollywood blockbusters offers an opportunity to dissect the human relationship with its most profound natural environment, something this talk will explore. Due in part to the technical challenges of filming at sea, maritime films have often been at the forefront of technological innovation, from the use of tubing to film underwater sequences in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the utilization of CGI in Titanic, to the crisp digital animation and motion capture of Avatar: The Way of Water. Sea films suggest progress alongside inflated economic conditions in the form of runaway budgets. At the same time, the environmental impact of blockbuster filmmaking, including digital animation, as well as phenomena such as Nemo and the Jaws effects, and the carbon footprint of producing digital images, suggests that the impact is devastating. Likewise, they also reflect global power imbalances, colonial residues, the fetishization of the sea as a site of masculine prowess. So this is what I'm going to look at. I'll give an overview of how the blockbuster maritime film has developed over time, and then look more in detail about Avatar. The relationship between the sea, cinematic spectacle, aesthetics, technology, and economics was established from the outset of cinema. The spectacle of movement was essential in films such as Rough Sea at Dover, as you see here in the GIF. This is one of the first films ever made and then subsequently screened in the US. The camera was to offer innovations and new ways of seeing. In 1914, the Williamson brothers premiered their film, The 30 Leagues Under the Sea, or Terrors of the Deep, which is made using their patented photosphere, a submersible with an airtight chamber and a viewing window that housed the camera operator. It made the undersea world, previously the subject of myth, speculation, and mystery, visible to scientists and the general public alike. As Cohen notes, quote, scientists were looking at sea life in its natural form for the first time in their careers. The Williams would later pioneer this technology in the first major adaptation of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in 1916, which, as you can see, was advertised as a grand spectacle and special event. As Anne Elias suggests, the pioneering work of the Williamsons and others in photographing the underwater realm at this time was heavily mediated not just with a sense of adventure and mystery, but also by imperial and capitalistic attitudes of conquer and exploit. The techno-capitalist apparatus of the film camera adequately reflected this. And this is manifest in the Williamsons' film The Submarine Eye from 1917, an adventure travelogue which features Williamson himself fighting with and killing a shark on camera. To conquer, but not to conserve, was mixed with detached awe and wonder, and such an approach would continue to inform aquatic filmmaking. Similarly, Disney's technical adaptation of 20,000 Leagues from 1954 also proved popular with audiences. The film employed complex nautical filming sequences and ran over budget, making it one of the most expensive productions ever made at this time. So these films not only represented signifying industrial practices, but also extended them into corporeality. 20,000 Leagues followed its 1916 predecessor by utilizing the light and clear waters of the Caribbean for filming. The Cannibal Island sequences in the film were filmed in Montego Bay, Jamaica, where local extras were paid to portray said savages, while local fishermen were employed to catch, quote, large quantities of fish on New Providence Island, including at least one 8-foot shark that was killed for the production. So not only did this extend poor environmental practices into the realm of creating entertainment, but actively enforced colonial attitudes and practices. The sea, its ecosystem, and the people who live and work there were there for use and entertainment purposes. Elias has identified a history of colonialism and racism linked to the filming of underwater spaces, dating back to the Williamsons, but also how locals' creative labour was whitewashed from the finished products. At this juncture, it is important to remember that film is a material process. From pre-production to exhibition, it has an environmental impact. With the introduction of film in Victorian Britain at the height of the British Empire and the Gilded Age of US economic expansion, it is heavily bound up with the exploitative and colonial practices of 19th century capitalism. As David and Todd explain, the concept of the Anthropocene began with the era of Western colonization of the Americas and continues, quote, the continuation of practices of dispossession and genocide coupled with a literal transformation of the environment. And as we shall see in the case of Avatar, this practice continues somewhat, albeit disguised in different ways. Hollywood recalibrated again in the 1970s, and the defining blockbuster of the change from old to new Hollywood was Steven Spielberg's Jaws. A troubled production history and spiralling budget once again proved that the maritime film was the territory of the blockbuster with its advanced resources. An unintended consequence of the film was to reinforce cultural attitudes to sharks as cultural devils that threatened humanity, an attitude violently recalibrated in the 21st century's plethora of shark attacks films, such as the Meg theory. The Jaws effect describes the process whereby the actual threat of endangered species has been artificially reversed by repeatedly negative portrayals. Jaws have become the most financially successful film ever made for a while, suggesting the reach of such attitudes. A title also claimed for 12 years by James Cameron's maritime epic Titanic. Titanic wedded state-of-the-art special effects with traditional romantic melodrama, offering romantic spectacle alongside the spectacle of engulfment that was to define later films. 2 years previously, the troubled production and financial underperformance of Kevin Costner's environmental epic Waterworld and Rennie Harlin's Cutthroat Island, both 1995, had once again established the maritime blockbuster as a site of excess, both of production budgets, but also of the ability of blockbusters to act as benchmarks for Hollywood's internal processes. Waterworld itself was the first major film to posit the potential effects of global warming of the polar ice cap, with original director Kevin Reynolds influenced by everything from biblical flood narratives to the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And the 21st century has also seen a plethora of blockbuster narratives with the sea as its central spectacle. Digital cameras and CGI technology have eroded many of the economic and technical constraints of filming at sea. Some of the most successful of these are the Pirates of the Caribbean films. And given its technological and aesthetic qualities, the sea is a visual environment integral to the visual culture of fantasy films, most evident here, or for example in Aquaman. The sea in these films is therefore a complicated space and is not easy to characterize. It is at once a space of fantasy and artifice, of national capitalist endeavor, or a denationalized space of individualist criminal plunder, to concealer of monsters, a place of opportunity and utopia, or of death and purgatory. Elsewhere, we see a rebuke to the destructive Anthropocene practices reflected in the ocean. 2012 imagines and vividly depicts the enforced transgression of the boundary between sea and land by positing a world irrevocably altered by rising and angry seas. When the sea engulfs the land, the boundaries are broken and the rules of civilization break down. This returns the human-oceanic relationship back to a biblical conception. Yet in the 21st century maritime blockbuster, not only does the sea cross over, but it also brings with it giant tossing waves that destroy the progress of humanity. And this concept may be traced as far back at least as the 1970s cycle of disaster films, such as The Poseidon Adventure from 1972, which, coincidentally or not, followed increased awareness of environmental degradation following the publication of Rachel Carson's seminal Silent Spring in 1962, and the establishment of international environmental groups and directives, such as Greenpeace and Earth Day in 1972. Jeff King describes these disaster films as offering, quote, a redemptive assault on humanity's decadence. In 2012 and similar films, the sea destroys everything in its path in what might be termed a spectacle of engulfment, indicating that redemptive spectacles of Anthropocene destruction persist and intensify. And once again, the treatment of the sea and maritime spaces in blockbuster narratives gives us pause to consider what has changed in humanity's relationship with the natural world and why this might be. Images of spectacular marine destruction also draw on cultural antecedents and offer the sea as a cultural demon, albeit one that often reflects back humanity's self-destructive practices. Latest projections detail apocalyptic warnings of critical thresholds being reached or already breached, with biblical floods increasing by the year, coastal erosion, oceans choked by plastic and pollution, and sea levels rising to dangerous proportions. And it's significant that in this period, special effects-driven disaster and science fiction spectacles have used the tidal wave as the literal conduit for disaster. In The Abyss from 1989, aliens threaten the Earth with destruction through a series of tidal waves. Likewise, Spielberg's AI artificial intelligence posits a world in which rising sea levels have engulfed a large majority of coastal cities. In Deep Impact, as with 2012 and Knock at the Cabin, the titular impact is also oceanic, destroying the world through giant tsunamis. It might be fair to say that the sea is a cultural demon across these texts, a reflection perhaps of the times in which they were produced. Elsewhere, Finding Nemo and similar films offer a similar reorientation of the sea, utilizing technology to create an environment that overwhelms in its spectacle of light and color and clarity of image, evoking the sea as a seductive and exotic environment, and in doing so carries an environmental message of conservation, which, as we shall see, is often undermined by wasteful and excessive production practices. Animation has increasingly carried with it an environmental message, at times simply showcasing the exoticism and beauty of marine environments to exemplify that this is something of a sacred space, while at others appending a forceful moral and educative lesson within the narrative. Subsequent Disney films have continued to utilize the naturally alluring spaces of the ocean with a robust environmental message, most prominently displayed in Moana and its recent sequel, in which the environmental practices of the Polynesian village are matched by a sentient and visually arresting ocean. These environmentally aware narratives, which Cristina Formenti suggests encourage environmental subjectivities, often promote themselves as sober educating. Yet this is confined to representation and narrative, and complicated and problematized by the material processes of producing animation, which is in no way confined to the animated form. An eco-critical reading of such text suggests their monumental ecological footprint, their often creative waste, or to employ a term from Bosel, their cinematic excess. Formenti's material analysis of the production methods of a number of animated productions that deployed multiple techniques to strive for cinematic realism indicates the duplicity of the process. To conclude this study, Avatar: The Way of Water will be considered as a final maritime blockbuster spectacle whose duality of message and process highlight the problematics of current representational and material signifying practices. The original film had been criticized for its colonial narrative, despite its pacifistic and environmental messages. Elsewhere, the environmental subjectivities actively encouraged in the narrative are overt. This is a point made apparent in the narrative subjectivity, but also in the film's marketing materials. In a making of video, star Zoe Saldana talks about the devastating effects of climate change, linking the film's aesthetic to real-world change. However, the same video also indicates the scale of the production and its environmental footprint. A huge tank was constructed to film underwater motion capture sequences painstakingly and over several months, with cast and crew flying all over the world to descend upon filming spaces in California and New Zealand. These were then animated by teams of SFX artists. Principal photography began in California in 2017, meaning a 5-year production and post-production period. This was offset slightly by back-to-back filming with the film's sequels. Despite this, the production has been hailed as one of the greenest sets ever, with predominantly solar-powered sound stages, plant-based catering, and with low-flow water facilities allegedly saving over 29 million gallons of water, which is largely at the insistence of James Cameron's wife, Armis, a sustainability advocate. Yet, this does not consider the increasingly important post-production scale. Formenti calculates that one 7-minute episode of the 3D animated series Plankton Invasion had a carbon footprint of 417 tons of carbon dioxide. The bandwidth required to store and render the data for The Way of Water was incomparable, with the entirely animated film clocking in with a release time of 192 minutes, not taking into account scenes that were excluded from the final cut. A data storage number that the Wellington company Weta Studios could not perform conventionally, instead employing the data storage services of Amazon's AWS cloud storage facilities and, quote, rendering close to 3.3 billion thread hours, the metric for measuring computer power, according to producer David Conley. The assumption is that the digital realm is more environmentally friendly than the physical spaces of filming, as it is immaterial. But this is demonstrably not the case. Data requires vast physical spaces to electronically store and process it, which requires electricity to power it, and vast amounts of water to keep it from overheating. Head of cloud provider Scaleway admits that, as an extreme example, a 15-megawatt data center in America can use up to 360 gallons of water a day in order to facilitate this. The way of that water is very clear. So such a seemingly irresolvable paradox typifies the Hollywood blockbuster, the Maritime blockbuster in particular, as size, scale, excess, and grandeur prove seductive, their message to inspire the required awe and contemplation, fear and respect for the natural world. But at the same time, they ask us to sit back and indulge in this excess and take perhaps little responsibility for its impact. This has continued into the 21st century, and one that attends to broader cultural shifts in the perception of the world's greatest ecoclimate. These films offer shifts and recalibrations in how we see the natural world that exists alongside and informs our shift in perceptions of the sea as at once a cultural demon that threatens at times to encroach or even destroy humanity itself, or at other times a fragile environment under threat from the tyranny of human practices. They pose the collective question, how do we bridge these contradictory perceptions? Most importantly, perhaps, they provide a space to consider the marine environment that is also actively and materially bound in the process of cinematic production and consumption, to fear it or fear for it, not only a spectacle of astonishment, but also of admonishment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. This was really interesting. And as we've shifted more towards the sort of humanities and visual cultures and interdisciplinary approaches to material culture, I'm really excited to introduce our last speaker, Airin Farahmand. I'll let you set up your slides as I read out your bio. Airin is a PhD candidate in the Cultural Studies Department at Radboud University in the Netherlands. Before moving to the Netherlands, she completed a BSc in Mechanical Engineering at Tabriz University, Iran. She obtained her BA in Arts and Culture Studies and her research MA in Cultural Studies from Radboud University as well. Together with Liedeke Plate and Laszlo Muntean, she co-edited the volume Materials of Culture that came out in 2023. Her primary research interests lie at the intersection of feminist studies, science and technology studies, and material culture studies. In her dissertation, she explored plastics' vibrant cultural life in the contemporary world by investigating its material history, process of commodification, domestication, and commercialization. She treats plastic as a cultural artifact within modern consumer culture, emphasizing its role in shaping a global throwaway culture. Additionally, she's fascinated by artistic and speculative responses to the plastic crisis and the potential of creating practices for imagining alternatives and forging radical collective actions. In her research, she strives to contribute on the ongoing debate on sustainable futures and highlight the importance of feminist future-making practices within that debate. So if you'll join me in applause reaction to welcome Airin, I will let her start.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I go right into my presentation. I know that we are a bit tight on time. The title of my presentation is The Requiem for a Vanishing Lake, in which I look at a photography project by Iranian photographer Solmaz Daryani, who captures the gradual death of Lake Urmia, a photo of which you can see in the background. Okay. Lake Urmia is the largest hypersaline lake in the Middle East, located in northwest Iran in the Azerbaijan province. It covers an area between 2,300 to 6,000 square kilometers. It is a highly significant biodiverse aquatic system hosting a wide range of flora and fauna, bacterial species, and microfungi. It is also a popular stopover site for migratory birds such as gray cranes and flamingos. In fact, the unique presence of these birds in a rather unusual and dry region such as the Middle East has turned them into a marker of regional identity. You can see statues of flamingos in the cities, villages, and beaches close to the lake. The rich biodiversity has led to the growth of the biotourism industry in the region, providing an important source of income for the locals. So what has happened to the lake and how dire is the situation? In the past few decades, Lake Urmia has suffered from severe environmental challenges, leading to its remarkable reduction in size. The depletion is partially due to environmental factors such as global warming causing years of severe drought in the region, and partially due to human factors such as unregulated dam constructions or reutilization of the water resources and unsustainable agricultural practices. The photo on the right shows the lake on September 7, 2023. The photo on the left was taken on September 6, 2020, 3 years ago. At the time, there were plans for international cooperations between Iran, Azerbaijan, and Turkey to revive the lake. Due to its immensity, the lake's desiccation impacts the broader region. The consequences include the possibility of salt storms, increased risk of health problems such as rising rates of asthma and cancer, the loss of biodiversity, and forced environmental migration. Despite the attempts, however, the lake's revival has not been successful, as you can see in the photos as well. In Iran, this situation has turned into a heated political issue, and it was also one of the main points raised in the 2024 presidential campaigns. So who am I and how do I fit into this picture and this topic? I'm from the broader Azerbaijan region in Iran, where the lake is located. I come from a city called Tabriz. You can see it in this picture, in the slide. It's the largest city in the region. It hosts many climate migrants who come to Tabriz in search of better jobs after losing their livelihoods in areas close to the lake. People in this region are mainly Azeri-speaking people. Iran is a mainly Persian-speaking country. So they are kind of like an ethnic minority, have a strong sense of ethnic identity that comes from their language and cultural heritage. I have felt the loss of the lake very personally. I'm sorry, do you hear the noise at the outside? Okay, good. I don't know what's going on.
That's perfect, yeah.
Yeah, I have felt the loss of the lake very personally. I consider it an important cultural wound that needs to be attended to. And my presentation is mainly about Solmaz Daryani's brilliant photography project. However, I recently visited Lake Urmia in December, and I thought it might be worthwhile if I included a little personal anecdote before going into the photographers. This is in a form of a letter that I wrote to the lake, accompanied by some of the photos I've taken there. Disclaimer, I'm not an artist or a creative writer, but I thought with my narrative, I could maybe convey a sense of eco-grief very personal, that arises at the site of vanishing once familiar landscapes. So please bear with me before going to Daryani's photography project, which I find brilliant. Dear Lake Yermia, our acquaintance stretches far back in time. I must have been 9 or 10 when I first visited you. I remember gazing in awe and admiration at my friend's tanned skin. She had visited you first and returned with countless stories. Tales of a fun-filled road trip, swimming in the lake with her sister, basking in the sun, and playing on the beach. When my family finally decided to take a weekend trip to visit you, I couldn't be happier. I don't remember much of the road trip, to be honest. It would be a lie to say that I remember you or even our whereabouts on that trip. Only later did I learn that your shores span generously across the region known as the Azerbaijan province in Iran. I can't say for sure which beach we visited. It's quite likely that instead of traveling all the way to Urmia, the heart of your vast rolling waters, my parents chose the easier route, opting for a closer, less remarkable beach near our city, Tabriz. Still, a few memories remain strikingly clear. I remember the glaring sun pouring over my skin, the warm embrace of your salty waters welcoming every visitor, and the rich, pitch-black, mineral-heavy mud believed by locals to hold healing powers. I later learned that mud tourism used to be a thriving industry in this region. I was so drawn to the viscous, playful texture of your healing soil that I couldn't keep my hands off it. I also remember the envious looks of older women with limited mobility who kindly and eagerly asked if I could share some of the mud I had gathered. So enchanted was I by your slick, sticky earth that I went to great lengths collecting it from every corner of the swimming area. For a long time, this was the picture I had of you in mind: bright, animated, powerful, healing, and generous. But growing up, I would hear about the crisis. I don't know why I never visited you in my adult life. You surely were always at the back of my mind, lingering quietly at the edge of memory. Perhaps part of me was scared of what I might see. Perhaps I preferred to watch your slow death behind the screen at a safe distance. Because each time I thought about the headlines, I could feel the grip of grief. The stranded flamingos, birds stopping their thrilling visits, dried up shores, bio-loss and extinction. Last December, I finally decided it was time for our reunion. Was I going to meet you on your deathbed and be a witness to your perishing beauty? The thought of it brought pain with such great force that I became hesitant to visit. I gathered my courage and went on a road trip with my dad. The timing of our visit couldn't be worse. There was a strong, thick mist of air pollution hovering above the whole region for a week. It was hard to see the contours of the mountains. When we reached Urmia, we stopped to ask a local man how to get to your shores. "Why do you want to go there?" he replied. "It's all dried up. There is nothing to see." He showed us the way with little enthusiasm and went back to his business. We drove up to the bridge where I saw deserted, swan-shaped paddle boats lined up on the shore. It looked like a ghost town with fallen tourist signs and abandoned shower spots. The water was extremely shallow. I thought I could probably easily walk through the lake and go to the other side. We traveled across the bridge. The houses too were abandoned on the other side. Most of them used to be hostels for tourists from all over the country. I felt an uncanny sense of uprootedness. These landscapes should have outlived us, I thought. Without them, how can we orient ourselves in the world? I tried to imagine you as I remembered that sunny weekend in my childhood. We built our lives around your presence. You so selflessly embraced and nourished us. You are a vessel for our memories and our sense of identity. You are our roots. That's a photo of my dad, in case you're wondering. I'm going to move to Solmaz Daryani's project now. The Eyes of Earth. The project stems from a deep personal connection with the land, inspiring a narrative that is as much about visuals as it's about roots, connections, and memories, things which I believe contribute to what we can call eco-identity. Daryani uses her subjective position as a member of the regional community to narrate the story of the lake in tandem with the people whose livelihood depends on it. The project shows the extent to which the photo series reflects the artist's deep personal and communal ties with the lake. Here is the artist's statement, and I quote, "I grew up beside Lake Urmia, once the largest lake in the Middle East and the second largest salt lake on the planet. The nearly 6 million people who live in the Urmia Basin have deep social and economic ties with the shrinking body of water. The Turk Azeri people who live around the lake treasure it as a symbol of their identity, calling it the turquoise saltier of Azerbaijan. Once a thriving tourist destination, Lake Urmia provided countless people, including my mother's family livelihoods. My mother's family livelihoods. My grandfather ran a lakefront motel in the touristy port city of Sharafkhane, and my uncles were sailors. I spent all my childhood summers on the shore of the salt lake in my grandparents' house. I cherish those memories and still remember the sound of the waves, the chatter of beachside vacationers, the sulfur smell of the dark mud, and the salty breeze in the mid-afternoon heat. In this long-term ongoing personal environmental story that I started in 2014, I tried to demonstrate the impacts of the dying of Lake Urmia on my own family, ecosystem, and people living around it to reflect the interconnectedness of humans and the environment. The vanishing of Lake Urmia is much more than an environmental hazard. It is an emotional wound in people's memory. For those who remember what this place once was, the lake is much more than a receding blue spot on the world map. It is part of our identity, and we can only hope that it does not vanish forever. In The Eyes of Earth, Daryani revisits her family photo album, bringing to light the precarious memories of the landscape on the verge of disappearance. These photos are mnemonic devices, evidence of significant happy moments in the past, with the hope of their continuation in the future. The refashioning in a new context calls for a different effective response. The landscape, which in earlier photos was merely a background, now takes the center stage. Instead of witnessing a continuity, we are confronted with a rupture. The photos thus document a sense of ecological loss, disorientation, and alienation. You can see it clearly, more clearly in a series of photos that are a pastiche of earlier tourist images showing the same spot at two different points in time. These photos demand a form of recognition and ultimately judgment from their viewers. They ask them to recognize the loss of an object that is no longer part of the present moment. In the words of Ronald Barthes, they establish a type of consciousness that is not the consciousness of the being there of the thing, but an awareness of its having been there. The photograph thus becomes a conjunction between the here now and the there then. It is between these lines that a sense of loss is acknowledged and reenacted. The loss of the lake, as the artist expresses in her statement, is not merely a bioloss. It leaves an indelible mark on the community's sense of distinct identity in a culturally and ethnically diverse country. Recognizing these cultural ties turns the lake into a grievable body. Grieving, as Judith Butler explains, is imbued with political significance. A grievable life, she argues, is a life that is worthy of mourning when it is lost. Rather than being neutral, however, the ability to name the grievable subject and mourn for its loss is highly charged politically. One open grieving, Butler suggests, is bound up with outrage, and outrage in the face of injustice or indeed of unbearable loss has enormous political potential. It is in this context that remembering the lake as a source of life, rather than merely a shrinking body of water, gains political importance. As long as the lake is detached from the life of regional communities, the region's future looks bleak, as also I think the case with climate migrants. This decontextualization furthers the practice of social forgetting that threatens the sustainment of the local cultural identity. As much as remembering is what Jan Assmann calls a realization of belonging, forgetting can shatter a community's sense of selfhood. In this context, active remembering of the past becomes a countercultural practice against erasing the memories and identities of an ethnic minority. But what happens if there is no such political space for expressing grief, outrage, and public mourning? The importance of naming and mapping the entangled histories of the lake and the locals becomes even more apparent in light of this question. Here, I would like to draw attention to the broader political context of Iran, where acts of open protest are not easily tolerated. The politicization of the lake state of eco-crisis and eco-emergency has led to the suppression of the voices of environmental activists. Daryani's photos illustrate the violence of stripping a grievable subject from its capacity to be counted as such. In one of the photos, the photographer's grandfather enters his abandoned motel beside the lake. A written text accompanies the photo. My grandfather's motel, which used to be perpetually busy, is now empty and ruined. In summers, even after the lake retreated, he fixed the windows broken by the wind as a habit. He always had the hope that those pleasant and crowded days would come back. He died in October 2018. I find a parallel between the grandfather's return to the ruins of his guest house and the recalcitrant quality of the repressed memories of the lake finding their way into the works of art. The trauma on an individual level intersects with the cultural trauma on the collective level. As long as the grievable subject is refused its proper status, the past keeps haunting the present moment. Identifying a relationship between the ability to mourn and the ability to care, Joshua Trey Barnett argues that grievability names an imagined future response to loss that animates care in the present. I believe many of Daryani's photos are curated in a way to elicit such a response from their viewers. In a group of photos whose narrative evolves around the artist's grandmother, we can see this plea for care. In the one that you see in the slide, Daryani depicts her grandmother in her orchard surrounded by almond trees. The caption reads, "Photo taken by my uncle 35 years ago shows my grandmother standing in her orchard. When the shrinking of the lake began, it affected my grandmother's orchard and made the almond trees dry." In the next photo, we see the grandmother revisiting the same site in 2015, years after the first photo was taken. The orchard is in near ruins, the almond trees are dry, and the village has almost disappeared. The grandmother's story comes to an end in an indexical photo of a plant plot belonging to her. In an ironic nod to the state's inability to tackle the crisis, the artist explains, "My grandmother loved trees and plants, and every corner of her house was filled with plants. She was an illiterate woman who knew the importance of the balance between humans and nature and managed to plant 800 trees during her lifetime. She died due to COVID-19 in 2020. Grief over witnessing the impacts of the lake's vanishing on the region fuses with grief over the loss of the grandmother, a prominent protagonist in the photo series. By mobilizing grief, the photos ask the viewers to engage in a practice of empathetic spectatorship that fosters care and responsibility and demands the right to mourn for the losses that the community has and continues to endure." To conclude, the rich cultural archive on which Daryani's project is built motivates a new narrative of Lake Urmia's desiccation, whose focal point is the locals and their deep-rooted relationship with this vanishing body of water. By situating the crisis in its socio-cultural context, the photos render its huge toll on the community's culture and sense of identity visible. The Eyes of Earth offers a new pathway for capturing the violence of anthropogenic climate change. Refashioning the past become effective aesthetic strategies for portraying the connection between the lake and the local communities. Moreover, in bridging the gap between the past and the present, the photos function as tools of resistance that in the political climate of contemporary Iran open up an unofficial space for expressing grief and public mourning. These effective responses to state of eco-crisis have the potential to instigate practices of care and hopefully mobilize people politically. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for this absolutely beautiful and powerful presentation, and also for the letter. I really loved that. I think it was amazing. I know we're slightly over time, but we're going to take a few minutes to do questions. If anybody has to leave, please feel free to leave whenever you must. But also please do say if you have any questions. Sam has put questions in the chat for Matthijs, MD, and Mark. So you're welcome